So, Ms. Klasser, what recommendations would you have to put in place a mechanism for timely payment by them? What is the reasonable time frame, assuming, yes, that we will sign this contract, we've taken care of then our contractual obligations. The letter you provided gives the scenario of why this long lag time, and so I guess you could say that if you compile all these bullet points, it makes sense. But I think that we need to have, you know, accurate and timely reporting. So I would like to have us maybe for a while get quarterly reporting on Mercer. It's not going to take a lot of board time. It could be put on consent perhaps, or if you felt it was appropriate, or your successor, to bring it to the board and just give us an update. These are because I think it's also good to keep in front of us the actual true prescription benefit costs, and then that keeps it in front of the board, it keeps it in front of the public, and then we can see, are we getting the timely payment? So I think that reporting would actually require that your department put a mechanism in place so we could see that timely reporting. And I don't think it has to be a big deal, but I think it would be appropriate on a quarterly basis for a while to get that.
I think it would be appropriate to update the board on a quarterly basis on the status of the health plan period.
Sure.
So not just the Medco side of, not just the prescription drug program, but also the medical, the cost of our medical. I think it would be very appropriate to do that. A mechanism I put in place as a part of my succession planning is we had spent 2 days of strategic planning with key personnel as to the dates and timelines when contracts are due, when renewals are up, what Mercer's role is in getting signed documents to us in a timely fashion so that we can get them to the board timely. So at the end of those 2 days, I sent everybody home with their calendar and dates as to when everything was due. And so, and that's exactly what they're working off of right now. That should definitely help keep everybody, the knowledge of these contracts in the forefront of everybody involved in that process. The office services supervisor in human resources has been charged with making sure those documents get to the clerk of the board and everywhere else timely. Mercer has the same calendar. They are now aware that every document has to come to the county signed first. A lot of times they send us blank documents without signatures, and I've educated them on the fact that we won't sign anything without the vendor signing first. So there's been a back and forth in that process in the past, so we've corrected that. So I did do some work on that, Supervisor Smith, in regards to the processes that were not in place in some of these cases. So I feel comfortable that this should not be such an exaggerated overlap in time like it has been in the past. The other piece of that is with whoever the benefits administrator is in the future, with the status of healthcare, the status of our budget. I do think it's just a one-page report to this Board of Supervisors on a quarterly basis would be a great idea for all components of the health plan.
Thank you, Linda. Any members of the public want to speak on this issue? Okay.
Follow-up comment, Mr. Chair. So, Ms. Clauser, I think it would be important to look at the data at the bottom of the memo titled Subject 2007 Medco Plan Experience.
Yes.
I think we need a little explanation, and I know that Mr. Anderson is here from the retirement system to comment, and I believe that was primarily to questions that Supervisor McCowan had at our last discussion of this. And I think he has some very brief but substantive information to bring forward with respect to the question on the retiree health obligation and whose is it, and a brief reference to the excess earnings of the retirement system covering those costs and not the County of Mendocino. However, the County of Mendocino is, if you will, second in line to cover those benefits if and when the excess earnings of the retirement system are not available to provide those benefits based on a resolution of this body. But if you could just comment at the bottom of that graph, I think it's good detail. It shows the active health plan, it shows the retiree health plan, it shows the total Medco or prescription benefits that were billed and paid for 07-08 broken down by month. But at the bottom, it talks about the employee cost and the retiree cost, and then it talks about the county cost, and it's a little bit of a concern to me because of this issue about who really is bearing the cost and making sure that the public has adequate and accurate information on this. It talks about the county cost, quote unquote, of the Medco for the retiree plan, if I'm reading this correctly. And I think it's noteworthy that it's almost the identical amount for the active employees and the retirees, just the way that it's around $2.4 million for a 2-year period for each.
That is interesting. I noticed.
So it approaches the 4.5 million, which is on our agenda summary. So but the county cost isn't really technically, is it a county cost? Because it is not being borne by the county of Mendocino. It's being paid for by the retirement excess earnings, is my understanding. So I think that in a certain sense, it's a little misleading. I mean, basically, you might want to reference the relationship that we have with the retirement system and the county, that we are basically the plan administrators for it. So maybe a few words of clarification would be helpful on that. Thank you.
It actually, we do, and the retirement health plan is funded by excess earnings of the retirement system. Mr. Anderson, the retirement administrator, is here to speak to that in more detail. However, ultimately, if the excess earnings of the retirement system go away, then there is no funding for this health plan. So that's why, for purposes of our reporting it out, it ultimately is the county's responsibility to pay for this. However, per a previous resolution in 1998, this amount, if in fact the excess earnings were to go away completely, we would be responsible for the entire amount, the I'm going to say 2.4 million. We would be responsible for that entire amount, we being the county, the Board of Supervisors, and that it would be expected at a minimum that the retirees would share 50% of that cost, and the county would incur the other 50% per a resolution per a board resolution in 1998 when we cut off health insurance to future employees. That was part of that process. So right now we still have excess earnings that are covering the plan. However, Mr. Anderson has informed us that there's not much left in that excess earning pool, and so I'm going to leave him to talk to you, explain that to you a little bit as to where we are in regards to excess earnings. Does that answer your question, as why we still list the county?
I think it's good clarification.
Because
I'm
I
not
want
sure
the board to be aware that ultimately the board is, with the county, is responsible for the...
I'm not so sure this is the proper time to get into that.
Okay.
The issue of I think if we're going to do that, I think we should have Mr. Anderson. We got a lot of folks here on a time item at 11
Okay.
o'clock. So,
what
what I'd like to see is the board approve this contract and these other issues of the excess earnings and whatnot. That's an agenda item for another day.
I could quickly tell you, just for your information, and I think having a presentation by Mr. Anderson as to excess earnings and how that affects our retirement health plan is a great idea. Right now, a rough number is 8.5 million in excess earnings, which is going to cover this health plan for about 2 years, maybe, depending on how it goes from here forward. So, and that's important information for you to know.
Mr. Chair, I think that inasmuch as Mr. Anderson is here, that it would be beneficial to have a very brief presentation, and I do have a specific question. He cited as Director Clauser just did, the balance of the excess earnings, which is a little over 8 million, and we're not just talking about covering the prescription cost out of that, but also the retiree health care cost. You add those two together, I think we're probably at the 8 million. So I would like to hear a brief discussion of the relationship between our cost and the excess earnings, and what the prospect is for the county looking at having to pay those costs sooner rather than later.
Well,
so I think if we take 3 minutes, it'll be beneficial.
Well, we're not going to do that because it's going to take longer than 3 minutes because there's going to be questions. Mr. Anderson is a Mendocino County employee. He's going to be here every week. But members of the